All right, everyone. Hi, and thank you so much for joining us. For those of you new to Taste of Science, we're part of a 501c3 for science outreach. And usually we'd be holding a big in-person science festival, inviting you to meet your friendly neighborhood scientists in your favorite spaces. But these days, we're really only hanging out in our homes. So this year, we're going digital. This event is a collaboration between many of our city chapters. So please visit tasteofscience.org to see your local friendly Taste of Science organization and see if we're hosting events in a city near you as soon as quarantine's over. I'm Dr. Tara Bracken. I am the DC Taste of Science City Coordinator. I'm also an infectious diseases specialist focusing on global health. And tonight's event is a discussion of the future impacts of COVID-19. So I'd like to introduce our panelists for you. First, we have Myesha Alexander. Myesha is a Brooklyn-based biological anthropologist and creative artist. She is currently the Impact and Design Manager for the Clinton Global Initiative University and spends summers continuing to study and assist as a forensic anthropologist at sites around the world. Her blog, The Rockstar Anthropologist, highlights science, anthropology, and culture. Thank you so much for joining us, Myesha.
Thank you so much for the invitation today. I'm really excited to get a chance to talk to all the wonderful speakers and hear from them. Just to talk a bit more about myself and what I hope we will get a chance to discuss more in a more broad context is I'm basically really particularly interested in skeletal pathologies and diseases and early American urban populations, particularly from the 18th century, 19th century. And of course, there's a lot of health inequalities and information that we infer from that information and from that skeletal data set. I'm more specifically focused on African and early African and African American populations in those areas. And as a larger project, as you mentioned, I do the Rockstar Anthropologist and also the Mobile Bone Lab as part of my own public engagement efforts. I think that it's incredibly important that we try and engage the public as often as we can with science in a very interesting way and also in a very accessible way. So, you know, I have to practice jargon-free science a lot. And I think that that's really important in order to be able to have those conversations that we should be having in the public. And I do think it's part of my responsibility as a person interested in working in science. But in terms of COVID-19 and humanity, I'm going to borrow a lot from medical anthropology because medical anthropology is particularly well suited to understand the impacts that we're facing in the very near future. They draw from not just our current situation, but also really heavily and deeply from the past. And folks like me who are focused on forensic and archaeology, people are often really interested in what we have to say about death, right? Because death is a really clear component of our work, and it's really ever present currently in this global pandemic. But at the same time, we study death as a way to inform and infer information about our day-to-day lives, our cultural interactions, and our social institutions. And it's interdisciplinary in nature. And so we're looking to derive answers from a slew of different places, historical, biological, even artistic works, right, that are being produced during this time and place as an effort to sort of have this well-rounded view of what the human experience is like and how we expect it to change and perhaps what our society might be going through or headed towards in the future. Within a particular population of people and the broader global context as well. And everybody right now is dealing with this pandemic very differently in country to country and neighborhood to neighborhood. So when we're thinking about COVID as sort of revealing all of our societal insecurities, and other things that it's definitely revealing, it is very much part of the human experience. And what people are feeling, that anxiety that people are feeling, is not just from the risk of infection, but even more so about that growing reality of what's to come in our future. So thank you so much, and I hope to be able to talk more.
Great, thank you so much. Audience, if anyone has any questions, please go ahead and use the chat function to load up questions for our Q&A. We're going to come back to them after the panelists and a brief panel discussion at the end of the event. So moving on to our next panelist, we have Kara Cooney, who is a professor of Egyptian art and architecture and chair of the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Cultures at UCLA. Her research investigates the socioeconomic and political turmoil that have plagued the 21st dynasty, ultimately affecting funerary and burial practices in ancient Egypt. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. So a little bit about myself. I study human reactions to crisis, and I'm specifically focused on the Bronze Age collapse, which occurred in the 12th century BCE, around 1100 BCE. And so I look at human reactions to migrations, famines, competition over scarce resources, and I'm particularly interested in coffin reuse. Seems a strange and unusual thing for somebody to be doing, but if you can't get access to wood and materials, particularly wood, and yet you believe fervently that materiality is the way to turn your loved ones into Osiris or into the sun god himself, then you're going to do whatever you need to get to that materiality, even reusing the coffins of your ancestors. So around, starting around 1200, going on around into like 850 BCE, the ancient Egyptians removed one ancestor from a coffin, took that coffin, brought it up to a workshop, had it updated like we update our kitchens or our bathrooms, replaster it, repaint it, make it look modern and fashionable as they need it to, and hide that they're reusing it, and then put the newly dead into that coffin, which I know is very different from most of the guests that you have on right now who are hard scientists and dealing with all kinds of facts and data about the natural world. But I'm looking at how human beings respond to crisis, and my research concludes that human beings don't respond well to crisis until they absolutely have to. They continue doing the same exact thing over and over again, banging their head against that wall, proverbially, until they can't. And then they have to change. So one would expect the ancient Egyptians to have changed their religion such that it wasn't so materialistically based. Yet they did not do that. They simply reused, recycled, and redid these coffins. And we get an idea that even if it was wasteful, difficult to get these resources, people kept on doing it. And these are the kinds of things I see around me today, the crisis that we're dealing with, that people continue to be interested in their own convenience, continue to consume at the same rate they have before, and don't like to be told not to drive, not to go outside, not to do any of these things. And we're very dubious about the people that are telling us not to do these things, and we often like to make our own choices and reason it out ourselves.
Okay, I have so many questions, but we're gonna have to wait until the Q&A. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Okay, so next we're going to move to Dr. Cherise Rohr-Allegrini. Cherise is an epidemiologist and the San Antonio Program Director for the Immunization Partnership. She was the pandemic flu coordinator for the San Antonio Metro Health District in the Public Health Emergency Preparedness Division. She served as the Communicable Disease Program Manager for the Department of State Health Services, Region 8, where she led the outbreak investigation of the H1N1 pandemic. Thank you so much for joining us. It sounds like you're going to have a lot of insight on the ongoing situation.
Thanks. It's great to be here. I'm really excited about this today. I actually didn't hear all of what you said because I was blocked out. But yeah, so currently my day job is with Immunization Partnership, which is a nonprofit where we work to promote vaccination in the state of Texas. Texas happens to have a very large anti-vaccine community, and our work is really to improve health through prevention with vaccines. But as you heard, my background is in epidemiology and infectious diseases, and I've spent a lot of time in the last couple of months working with the community to educate people about COVID and help with the planning and response efforts locally.
Great, thank you so much. Again, just a reminder for the audience in case you missed it, if you have any questions for Cherise or for any of the panelists, please go ahead and pop it into the Q&A and we'll come back to them at the end of the event. All right, so next we have Julie Squires. Julie is a certified compassion fatigue specialist and a certified life coach, bringing a unique perspective to those exposed to the highly stressful, challenging, and sometimes traumatic environments of lab animal research, veterinary medicine, and animal welfare. She offers on-site seminars and workshops and online courses in compassion fatigue prescription, RX, private coaching, and records the Rekindling podcast. Thank you so much for joining us, Julie.
Hey, thanks for having me. This is awesome. Glad to be here.
Can you tell us a little bit about you and your work?
Yeah. So, I mean, you summed it up pretty nicely, but I think probably what I need to explain a little bit is what compassion fatigue is. So, and it's really an interesting time because right now the world is experiencing compassion fatigue. So what compassion fatigue is when we are witnessing others' pain and suffering, and it has a profound effect on us. So that's happening right now in the world as we, witness all the people that are infected with COVID-19, dying from it, even as we watch the pain and suffering of our frontline workers, we watch the pain and suffering of people who have lost loved ones. So it's all of that. Now, normally I deal with people who work with animals, and when you work with animals, you are also exposed to their pain and suffering. So what I do is I teach people how to enhance their mental health and well-being. And I teach them skills and tools of how to cope and manage with emotionally charged situations and times in their life.
Great, thank you so much. That work is so important, particularly now where we're in sort of an unprecedented situation from a societal perspective. None of us really have experience handling something like this. So I
Right.
can't wait to hear what you have to say in our panel discussion.
Yeah, great.
Okay, so we're moving on to our last panelist. Dr. Susan Tsang is a wildlife biologist specializing in Southeast Asian bat biogeography, conservation, and pathogens. Her consulting work centers around counter wildlife trafficking, natural resource management, and capacity building. She is a research associate at the American Museum of Natural History, the National Museum of the Philippines, and the Smithsonian Institution. Thank you so much for joining us, Susan. Oh, sorry, you're muted.
I got it.
Great.
So thank you for introducing me and inviting me to speak at this event. I am very excited to get people excited about bats. And is my slide up actually right now for?
That is a good question. I can't see it. There we go. Yes, it is.
Okay. So as Tara mentioned, I work on bats, and I actually specialize in a particular group of bats called flying foxes. So most people think of bats as like really small, they echolocate, they eat insects, but the ones that I work on are about the size of my forearm, and their wingspans are as long as I am tall. So these are really big bats for the most part that I'm working on. And they're really unique because they are the ones that are pollinators and seed dispersers for a lot of economically and ecologically important plants. Sometimes they're the only native terrestrial mammal on some really remote islands. And I have been fortunate enough to do a lot of my field work in Indonesia and the Philippines, where I've had a chance to go to some of these very remote places and learn about these bats and their natural history, their diet, their roosting behavior. And when we realized that, hey, we're the only ones that have been here for about 50 years, what's happening to the populations, we see that there's a lot of population declines. And a lot of that has to do with the changing environment and also with direct hunting and exploitation of the bats. So in a healthy environment, you will see that the bats are, happily drinking some nectar from the plants, and they get, pollen on their faces. and the trees are all there and they can just live happily there. But in a very modified landscape, you see drained mangroves on the left over there, and also bats that are being sold at markets. That particular one is sold for medicine because some people believe that if you eat them, it's supposed to cure asthma. It does not cure asthma. It doesn't do any of that. But there are a lot of cultural beliefs to overcome sometimes. And what is really important for people to understand, though, is that there is a very direct link between conservation work and disease ecology. So I also started working on infectious disease because this was a really interesting group for that question, but also they are natural reservoir hosts that are crashing and they are declining because of our actions in so many ways that we actually don't even know how bad it is for the bats. And so we've broken the system and we don't even know what our baseline is. So we want to make sure that the bat populations are healthy so that you get healthy ecosystems. And that way you don't have these spaces where people are able to get close to nature when they should not be there, where the animals are stressed and so they have to transport themselves between very large spaces in order to feed themselves every day. And that leads to a lot of unwanted contact in some cases. You know, some bats might not have forests to live in anymore, so they live in people's houses and they end up being persecuted or being culled because they are in spaces that humans do not want them to be in. And we try to work with a lot of communities directly to encourage them to understand more about how these bats are socially important to them. So in Southeast Asia, especially for Indonesia, we have done a lot of community conservation work where we focused on the bat as an important pollinator for durian. And durian is a culturally important fruit, not just an economically important fruit. So there's very strong ties and feelings from people about durian. So when you tell them, if you don't have any bats, you don't have any durian, the children start crying. And so people get really excited to try to protect the bats if it means that their own favorite thing is now endangered. So when I tell people, okay, well, you want to go to a tropical island for a vacation, well, the seed bank for the forest that's there is probably from this flying fox that flew by, and that's why you still have a forest there. You know, things that people care about actually are deeply related to the health of the bat population, and understanding how they actually exist in these spaces is a large part of how we can then prevent the next pandemic. Because we're trying to make sure that there are fewer stressors to the wildlife through their environment and directly to them in some cases, to make sure that there's no opportunity for the pathogens to jump from wildlife into humans. When you're putting people and animals too closely, especially in wildlife markets and in logging camps and things like that, you will get animals that are stressed, that are probably very unhealthy because people have been keeping them for very long. And you're also introducing transmission risk, and every single contact point is a transmission risk. And it's not just the bats, it's any wildlife. So you're actually endangering the entire ecosystem there, not just a singular species. And all of these animals are obviously important for the health of the forest itself overall. So we have been working on this issue for the past 5-6 years for my particular project in Indonesia, and we have made a lot of progress in working together with people from Singapore and also with other scientists in the region from the Philippines, from Thailand, from Malaysia, and we are building a large regional expertise that can then be tapped on in order to help solve these crises that are now global instead of singularly national. So yeah, anything else you want to know, I'm happy to answer. And I hope that people are excited about bats as much as I am.
Great, thank you so much, Susan. This is an absolutely essential part of this conversation. One health is something that seems to end up falling to the wayside when we talk about pandemic preparedness. But if you're not considering every aspect of the picture, we're not really going to be able to prepare. So I'm so glad that we have you here to talk about this angle as well. Thank you so much.
Yeah, excited to be here.
Okay, so again, one more reminder, if you have any questions for any of our panelists, please do type them into the Q&A, or if you're on Facebook, put it into the comment section and they'll relay it to me. And we'll get to the audience questions at the end of our panelist discussion. But before we get into our discussion, we thought, there's a lot of doom and gloom in the world, and for good reason, but, there's also a lot of good happening. And so Instead of our typical trivia or fun games that we do during our in-person events, we thought that this time we would talk about little acts of kindness that our audience or that our volunteers have been seeing in the world to just sort of lighten things up a bit and remind us of all the good that there still is around us. So, as it says, in these overwhelming times, most of us can't do much to help, but there are small things that we can do to support each other and our communities, and we wanted to share some of these stories. So we invite the audience also to please share your own stories of kindness in the comments or in the Q&A in the chat function on Zoom. So one of the ones that has already been sent to us, pet adoptions have been increasing across the US. So with more people at home, some are using the time to open up their doors to animals looking for a forever home, leaving some shelters in our area with no pets for adoption at all. And that came from rochesterfirst.com. And, you know, we have to pay the dog and cat tax. There's cute pictures of puppies and kittens all over the internet and all over social media that are now finding either forever homes or happy foster homes for the first time. Oh, sorry. So we'll save these for later. We're going to sprinkle these throughout the whole event so that you guys can just be reminded of all the goodness. So as it says, be kind, and we'll pop our way back over to the panelists. All right, so we have Julie. One more. All right, the gang's all here. So thanks for your intro remarks, everyone. It was really great to hear a little bit about what you do and how your work relates to the conversation we're going to have today. So the way this is going to work is we have a few questions to stimulate a conversation between you guys. And then later we're going to come back to some Q&A from the audience so that they have a chance to talk with you guys about what you're doing. Our first question is for Myesha, Kara, and Julie. So, of course, anyone who has something to contribute, please do. So how will this distance from others affect our individual and collective psyche as a society? Let's start with, how about Myesha? Do you want to pop in?
Sure. Okay. I think it's going to be hard to tell how we might change individually, and if it's going to be a long-term change or whether or not this is going to be a short-term change. I think that there are quite a few maybe cultural practices, depending on who you are and how you've grown up, that are being completely disrupted, right? If you've grown up in a neighborhood or an environment where everybody, when you see each other, you hug and kiss each other to say hello, you don't, even if it's a stranger, you don't necessarily, you may not necessarily lose that particular type of greeting, right? However, it might be really difficult on you right now because you're lacking the touch and feel and maybe a lot of the good feelings that come from developing those types of physical relationships. Whereas other people who may not necessarily be touchy or feely or be uncomfortable with those types of sort of greetings and exchanges, they might not be feeling anything, or they might not be feeling the same way about how our social distancing or physical distancing is really what it really is changing their everyday. In fact, they might sort of welcome some of those changes in behavior. So, but I think it's the larger question is, are some of these going to be long-term changes, or are they just going to just happen for now and going forward? Will we be able to see those things continue? I don't know. What do you think, Julie?
Yeah, Julie, how do you think people are going to cope with that or maybe even adapt?
Well, it's interesting because I noticed yesterday I had to go out and do some shopping at the health food store, and I noticed that I was like that other human beings were all of a sudden a threat to me. And I noticed how I was being as far away from them as I could, which I recognized immediately, and that sort of scared me in a way, because all of a sudden I thought, wow, this is such an interesting time, because never before have perfectly good strangers been an invisible threat to me, right? Because, all of a sudden, because we're dealing with something that we can, even if we don't even know we have it, we could innocently infect somebody else. So I thought about that, and I thought that's going to take some time for us to, like, when it's all over, what I call it, when we're on the other side of this, like, there will be, like, we're going to have to readjust that all of a sudden when I look at people, like, that I can openly embrace people and touch them and be close with them again. Like, that's going to take some time. But I also believe, and again, it's just how I'm wired, like, I see so much good that can come out of this. And that's what I choose to focus on. I choose to focus on all that we have the opportunity to learn about ourselves, about society, about what's really, truly important to us. And we are, we're being forced to figure that out for ourselves right now.
Okay. And so I suppose this is open to any of the panelists.
Can I?
Yeah, so actually, Kara, this is a perfect question for you.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Do you think in the short term, are we going to adapt, and do you think we're going to see the repercussions of that once this is all over, once we've moved on? Or do you think we're going to just sort of stay as we are and ride the tide?
Well, humans are reactive creatures. That doesn't mean that their reactions are always the best for the system going forward. And if you look back at history, you look at the flu of 1918 and the reactions to that. I mean, one reaction was prohibition, God's help us all. But that was one reaction to that. I don't know if that was like the way to get both.
We're kind of having the opposite reaction this time.
I don't think so, no, because I have a friend who's in Pennsylvania, and she told me they had closed down all the liquor stores not long ago, which is that policy is creating people to drive to Delaware and other states to get their liquor, because people, they're not going to give that up, because that's a coping mechanism. So policy can be very important, but if humans are reactive, I think that what we are relying on now, and I'm reading a lot of horrific things like the collapse of state societies, this book on authoritarianism. This is my light reading for these days. But as things apart, governments break up into their local sectors. So you may know your councilman or woman's name for the first time. You didn't know it before. You may be paying attention to local politics in a way that you did not before. In Los Angeles, the home of the homeless, we are now giving porta potties and sinks to homeless people. And that has taken, people have been blaming it on the poor people for forever. And now people are like, oh my God, maybe I could get sick because the poor get sick. And now the rich realize that they are connected to the poor. And now social safety nets that have been dismantled over the decades are slowly being put into place out of fear and out of reaction. Some reaction is not necessarily bad. So these social safety nets that we have dismantled in the United States of America, you have different reactions state by state for how we put those back together. And what we are doing right now in the 50 states of America is a long-term extraordinary study of human reactions of, if you do this, you get that. If you do that, you get this. And we can compare Illinois with Delaware, with Texas, with California. When they started the lockdown, when did they close schools? How much did they allow people to, or force people to shelter in place? And all of these things can be up for discussion. Who put social safety nets in? One final point, that in Los Angeles, the school system started giving out free lunches to just students, and you had to bring a kid with you to get your free lunch. Now that has turned into a soup kitchen of sorts, because people don't have food. My car just got broken into yesterday by some poor guy looking for change, I imagine. And there's no people eating half their McDonald's hamburger and throwing the rest out, right? So we're now finding ways in the infrastructure we have to give food to people and create social safety nets, and people are getting creative. And it is very interesting to see how we're using the systems that already exist to do that.
So that's actually an interesting point that I think can pivot to the next question I had for you guys. So how are people from various backgrounds affected differently? So you already touched on the socioeconomic side, but I'm thinking all. So socioeconomic differences, ethnic differences, gender orientation. What are your thoughts there? You've already touched on some of the social safety nets, but let's really dig into that.
Who do you want to start with?
You can start if you like, since you've already talked on it, but anyone who has any thoughts on this.
I mean, one could talk about this for forever, how the poor have already been eating bad food without real nutrition for some time, are diabetic already have high blood pressure. And these are the people most at risk for this disease. They don't have hospitals. They live in food deserts. That could go on. And then, of course, there's the females in the household who are the chief caretakers, or even, I would argue, hormonally conditioned to be those chief caretakers. They're the ones dealing with the homeschooling. They're the ones that are cleaning up more than not. I happen to be quite lucky in this circumstance, and my husband is making. Yesterday, I'll leave it on this and let other people talk. But yesterday I was like, oh, I'm going to make a soup and get into some stress cooking, which we're all doing.
Right.
And he's like, no, I have an idea for a soup. And he kicked me out of the kitchen. And then he got to stress cook and I did not, but the soup was delicious.
Cherise and Susan, we haven't had a chance to hear from you guys yet. So if you have any thoughts on this, please do weigh in. And Susan, I'm particularly interested on sort of an international perspective here,
I think that the international perspective is important, but also as an Asian American, there is a very different sense of response compared to everybody else, obviously.
Sure.
I live in what would be called a fairly liberal part of America. I live in New York. I live in Silver Spring outside of DC, pretty liberal blue parts of these states. And yet I've seen at least 2 or 3 incidents a week now, and it's usually when people are very stressed. So I see it when I am outside and going to the grocery store and people are really mad that they couldn't get eggs or toilet paper or something like that. And they'll see me walking to the grocery store and yell at me, or they'll yell at somebody else. And that has happened once this past week. And to the point where I actually prefer to go to Asian supermarkets, not only because I prefer some of the food there now, but also because I really don't have the same issue when I go to an H Mart or a Hong Kong supermarket, because no one is going to bother you there. So I think it's kind of made us more insulated as a community, which is not great because we've already had some of these issues where the othering of Asian Americans has existed for a long time, really. It's, since the 70s when laws are made against us, all kinds of stuff, but it's a perpetual otherness. We cannot blend in to become American because we will always look differently. And we cannot ever feel fully American because some people like to make us feel like we're not part of this society, even though we are. And from an international perspective, my family is from Hong Kong. And my family obviously has gone through SARS and also has gone through this now. And it's really difficult to make sure that everyone's okay because you only have so much time to catch up with them every so often because everyone's really busy now trying to readjust. And we just try to check in at least every few days. But at one point I had posted something where my brother's a police officer and he was infected, potentially, he's probably infected. And so we had to isolate him. And what happened was my relatives in Hong Kong could not get in contact with him. And then they freaked out and they were massively texting me for 3 hours. And I was sleeping because it was 2 a.m. So, it's really hard to make sure people are okay sometimes in real time. And they just worry a lot more because we're separated. And there's no way to check because no one can just drive over, So it's been a little bit difficult because of that.
I'm so sorry to hear that that's been your experience. And this is, obviously not the first time that I've heard of some of this awful reaction that's been happening, particularly in the US. And I would like to pivot back to Cherise to hear about her experience from a public health perspective. But first, Julie, do you have any thoughts on how we should handle these kinds of aggressions? And how do we also cope in a way that would prevent us from putting ourselves in these stressful situations where we might react badly and have the worst of us come out?
Yeah, well, I think, there's a challenge there because you're dealing with people's preconceived biases, right? So what I teach is that here's what I can control and here's what I can't control. I can never control what somebody says to me. I can't. I'm not in control of that, but I absolutely get to control what I make what they say mean. And we have the ability to, people's words are people's words. And I know, like, I'm going to remind us of what we learned in kindergarten. Remember, there was that little nursery rhyme. It said, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but names and or words will never hurt me." And what that means is that we always have the ability to interpret people's words however we want. And when people are using hate speech, we have the ability to decide whether or not we want to make that mean something about us, that there's something wrong with us, or that we are less than. Or we can make that mean that they are confused and have been taught hate from wherever they've been taught that. Like, and I know that doesn't seem like a very big deal, but it actually is a big deal of what we make people's words mean about us, because that's what we have control over, our interpretation of people's words. And I know for most of people watching this, they might think, well, how else would you interpret what people are saying? But you actually have the ability to decide and choose what you want to make people's words mean about you. Again, we as human beings, we all have opinions, and we like to let people know our opinions. And sometimes our opinions are filled with hate. There's no question about it. But I get to decide whether or not I make that mean that I am less than in any way. So that's my take on that.
Thanks, Julie. Cherise, let's pivot to you. So given your public health background and your experience with the H1N1 pandemic, do you have any thoughts on how people from various backgrounds are affected differently? And in particular, how is the public health infrastructure potentially preparing for that and helping with that?
Yeah, so definitely this is a big issue for us here in San Antonio. San Antonio is an extremely economically segregated city, predominantly Hispanic, but very economically segregated. So pretty much the southwest and east sides of the county are low income, high morbidity, with heart disease, diabetes, lung diseases, all the things that make you at higher risk for COVID, as well as being Hispanic. And I grew up in a Hispanic family, so I understand it really well. This concept of family. Your family is multi-generational, and you get together all the time, and you have your Friday night gatherings and your Sunday meals, and you spend so much time together. And we keep telling people social distance without really explaining what that means in a language people can understand. And I liken it to when you don't speak a language, you just talk louder. And on social media, we're just screaming louder and louder, and we're not actually saying, okay, why is this multi-generational family that lives in 3 or 4 households still getting together every Friday when we're telling them that you're not supposed to do that? It's because we're not clearly explaining what's going on. And we know this from doing Ebola is always my example,
Right.
And not understanding the local culture and telling them you need to change your practices because that causes disease, but not actually understanding why they're doing what they're doing. And we're doing the same thing here. And it's really hard because H-E-B is our main grocery store here. And the CEO is getting on social media saying, stop bringing your whole family to H-E-B to go grocery shopping. And the reality, and most people are saying, of course, you shouldn't do that. Just send one person. But the family that sends 5 people, they're not listening to the CEO. They're not paying attention to that anyway. They're not on social media, but they also just don't understand, well, this is what we do. This is our normal life. Why can't we just bring the whole family to H-E-B? So we're really trying to change the messaging, and from a grassroots level. So not the official public health agency, not the city agencies doing it, but really reaching into the influencers in the community. And that might be abuela that lives down the street, or it might be, the older guy that everybody listens to, whoever is the voice on that block, maybe. That's community. How you define community changes, but getting to that person and explaining to them what it really means to do, I hate the term social distancing, but to keep household units separate because of the commingling is leading to potential disease. So it's a challenge to integrate into that community to explain that, but that's something we're really working hard on now. We haven't seen many cases in this population yet, but mostly because we haven't been looking for them. And this is a population that also has no access to healthcare. And so until we really go into that community to start looking, we're not going to see cases until it kind of blows up in our face and we have people that are very sick, because those are the ones that are going to end up in hospital and ICU because they have all the comorbidities.
Right, and so what sort of barriers are you facing from a health department perspective in reaching those communities? Is it resistance to seek healthcare, or is it just lack of resources?
So it's a number of things. It's lack of resources and resistance to seek healthcare. And I know that, so I don't currently work for the health department, which is why I can say a lot of things
Right.
independently. And that's why I'm able to reach into different grassroots organizers through a lot of the political machines that work in our city. So politics is very local, and finding out, maybe not the political leader, but the grassroots organizer for a political campaign, that we call it, like one group is the comadres on our west side of town. It's all the old ladies that kind of drive the communication in this community. We're trying to reach into them and say and explain. So the barrier really is finding the right people to communicate that message, and recognizing that our formal documents with all the CDC and the city of San Antonio headers, those get thrown in the trash. So understanding how to communicate in a way, and once you do, people are willing. But not having insurance, people it's not part of your habit to go to the doctor, because you don't have health insurance until you go when you're really sick. So that's a barrier, and we've changed things so that people can have more access, but it's still a huge challenge.
So can I follow up on something she said? Because I am actually interested in talking more about the policy side also.
Sure.
For me specifically, that what I think about in terms of our lack of preparedness is also economic. So as a consultant, I'm self-employed technically. And all of the relief package in the UK and the US are geared towards people with salaries. And so I'm going to get nothing. And it's because of the fact that I'm self-employed. And yet we are the ones sometimes who need the most help during these particular crises. Particular for me when I have to travel internationally to do my work. So I have no new work coming in right now. And we don't know until when because of the travel bans. So this is actually a really critical issue. And because of the fact that you have a lot of people that are running small businesses also, they are also self-employed. And these small businesses are taking huge hits now. These small businesses are often the ones that are in neighborhoods that have communities that are very insular, and they need that kind of help, and it's not being injected into them at all. And they're going to feel a lot of the economic pain that's going to come from this. And they cannot afford healthcare anymore. So they cannot pay for anything to treat themselves, even if they wanted to, or go to the hospital. And people have resisted going to the hospital sometimes because they don't know how to pay for the visit. There was some news articles about some people who asked how much the ventilator would cost and who would pay for it if they survived or didn't survive. And both options were not great in terms of the answer. And so people would start choosing things where they're going to prefer to create more risk for themselves or for the community because they can't actually afford to do the better choice that we are advising people to do.
That's so true. I just want to throw in, San Antonio is a very service industry oriented place, but our hotel and restaurant is our main thing. And so all those low income families, those are also the mom and pop business owners that now have had to close their business, and it's not going to survive a month. And they have low wage employees who are not just unemployed, but are not going to have a job to go back to afterwards.
Right. That's absolutely devastating. And, it's an interesting point. Susan, I don't think I realized, I must have missed it, that the assistance was tied to employment. It's interesting because insurance is also tied to employment. So at what point are we just creating a hole that we can't dig ourselves out of? So I actually have a question for one of our anthropologists. If you can answer this, I'm not really sure. But from a social and behavioral change perspective, how do we communicate the risks associated with these kinds of behaviors, both the ones associated with social distancing, but also the ones associated with not providing for all facets of society? What's the thought process there?
I think this is a kind of a complicated question because there's so many different factors culturally, socially, that need to be, I suppose, worked out. I think that Sharice brought up a good point about, and also Susan brought up a good point about community organizations that can lead efforts from within and disseminating information, and also recognizing that we don't always give the best, or we're not always the best communicators. And when I say we, I mean the people that are disseminating the information about what to do if you're sick, or what to do to not transmit the infection to others. We give sort of partial explanations, and the messaging is not necessarily inclusive or representative or flexible at all of the people that we want to be able to get this particular messaging. It also doesn't necessarily take into account that because a lot of the systems and resources that are supposed to be in place structurally and systemically to address our well-being as a larger society don't necessarily protect everyone, right? So if they're not going to protect those people that are made vulnerable by those systems, either economically, socially, due to racism, sexism, all of the things in between, whether or not you are considered a legal or illegal citizen, all of these things stop people from not just getting help, but how they take in the information, how the information gets to them, and whether or not it's feasible even for them to take the advice that's given to them. And so we do have this layer of distrust that we also have to speak to. And you can't speak to it from an outsider's perspective, in my opinion. You need the people who are the leaders in a particular community to step up, and we'll see some of these communities organized definitely around this. And I live in Brooklyn, and I do see a lot of community organization for food, for health access, things of that nature. And I'm sure that they're going to be much more, I think they're going to be much more maybe successful with their efforts than some of the state and city places, especially those that are surrounded by police officers. They're probably going to have a larger success with getting out those information. So I do think how we disseminate the message and who is also helping us get those messages across is very important.
Yeah, and sort of to that point, it's important we know our audience and that we reach the right people to help us disseminate this message. But also, I'm speaking as someone with a background in strategic communications. A lot of times telling people don't do a thing is not enough. You have to provide them with an alternative of what they can do. So this is sort of open for the whole panel. How do you think it could be speculative, but how might we interact socially with each other, with the world, with our friend groups that exist and potentially new ones moving forward, both during quarantine, but then also like after things shift back? How do you think this is going to change how we as social beings function?
Just to jump in, after 9/11, everyone came together in a way because we could touch each other, and it encouraged everyone to hold hands, and yet a couple days after everyone came together, everyone then started to other and look to see who was to blame. In this situation, you see people looking for someone to blame. Weapons sales in the United States are off the charts because they're going to not shoot the virus necessarily, but shoot people that they think are somehow responsible for making them unsafe. And I think that is our human reaction right now, that people are hoarding things. They're looking for, my husband went out for toilet paper like 8 days in a row, finally found a roll of damn toilet paper, right? And people are protecting themselves and creating their compounds and othering everybody, even the people walking down the street in front of them, in a sense. And I think the most interesting thing about all of this social distancing and disconnection and having to stay in our homes is that we are realizing how very connected we are to everything. We humans are not unique to this planet in that we are also animals and can catch viruses from other animals. And so we are as embedded in our natural world as we were before, but we are now realizing it for the first time. And that despite things like rich people moving into Brooklyn and taking over the city, or people othering the immigrant who starts most of the small business in the United States, that as we push away these other people and say, I am this and you are that, we are now realizing socially and biologically, that we are more connected than we ever have been, and that it is through that connection and the creation of new social safety nets that we can find a way forward, and it is for the survival of all. And it will be an interesting thing to see those people that continue, those social systems whose policies continue to other, and those social systems whose policies are more inclusive and allowing of people to partake in their system. And it's a horrific way to make human experiments, but historians know that since you can't have human test subjects because it's unethical, you use history to have one state that reacted in this way and one state that wrote policy in that way. And then you do have human test subjects, and you can say, okay, this is how it works and that's how it works. And it's the historical lens that allows a way to see that.
Right. So based on your experience and that of the panelists, but also based on what has happened in the past, how do you think we might form some of those social systems that are inclusive in the face of this fear that, Julie mentioned? You go to the grocery store and that complete stranger might be the one who gets you sick. So how might we do that? And that's for anyone who wants to jump in, but also, Kara, if you have thoughts based on the historical record.
I mean, this is a horrible thing to say, and it's not going to happen in this circumstance, because I don't see this pandemic killing as many people as the Great Plague. And I'm being quite clinical in the way that I talk about this, because I'm reading books about social collapse, right? So that's what one does. But the years after a Great Plague are often times of renaissance and times of leveling. And there's a wonderful book written out there by a friend of mine at Stanford named Walter Scheidel called The Great Leveler. And it talks about pandemics and wars and moments when masses of the population are removed. And people have to come together and create new policies and remember keenly the pain that they have felt. For instance, Spain is one of the only European countries that has not turned immigrants from the West Asian immigration conflicts away, because they remember keenly the Franco years of pain. When you have a human cultural memory of pain, people do better at treating everybody better if you've gotten through that process. The sooner you forget the pain, the sooner you get seduced by the convenience, the sooner you get into your fast fashion, fast food, fast whatever, the more easy it is to forget these things, and the worse we treat each other. But how do you maintain pain within society for everyone, not just for the poor, but for the rich? There is a reason in our American culture that the poor treat each other with more kindness than the rich treat each other, in terms of money, in terms of things given away, all kinds of things.
So interesting.
I want to throw something in there about that. So I part of me doesn't feel as hopeful as I would like to be, but one element that we're seeing is this, I live in a very arts-focused community, is the celebration of the arts and how critical the arts are to our life, even though those are some of the people that are suffering the most. But one interesting thing that just came up today, a friend locally created a Facebook group for our art buyers and art sellers, so that artists have a place. They can't show their work on the street like we usually do in all our street festivals, but they can show their work in this format and encourage art buyers to come support them during this time, or to do online shows or various other things so that artists can survive. And I hadn't seen something like that before, where there really is a broad section of the society that is looking to artists to, they want to support them, but they also want art to infuse their lives because they need that during this time.
That's such an incredible story. We haven't seen, well, maybe there is something like that in DC. I haven't seen anything like that, but I really hope something like that happens here, because it's such a great way for us to come together non-physically, but also cope. Art is the way that we express ourselves, and sometimes it's how we get through this pain that Kara described, hopefully not too quickly, otherwise we're going to not treat people well.
I mean, I think as this pandemic goes on and people are starting to, lack for new content from the internet, they're going to realize that all of this was produced by artists and writers and people who are creatives that they don't pay enough for during the normal days.
Right. I actually had a conversation the other day with a group of artists that are really talking about, like, creatives. They're like, this is our time to shine right now. We are really having an opportunity to spread our work in a number of different places. People that don't normally get to engage with us are engaging with us. We're seeing different ways that people are DJing, from their homes and having sort of virtual parties, finding ways to break up regular television, the same old stuff that we're always sort of binging and watching, finding ways to engage online. I heard incredible monologues and readings the other night from Billie Holiday Theater, and the ways that we don't really get to have personal relationships with artists either unless you're in the art world. And I think this is really an important, in my opinion, art is a really important facet of the ways that we are connected and how we connect to each other, how we're able to tell our stories and our narratives. And in many ways, artists are often always sort of connected to the pain of society. My brother used to have this saying that he said he was an artist, he is an artist, and he would say he thought that artists were twice touched by God, meaning super sensitive and just empathetic and just people that were sort of made to take in the world and then spread it or show it in a different way, but a way that translates barriers of language and culture and religion and things of that nature. So I do hope that what we can get from art is sort of a motivation to do more, a motivation to continue to push policies. I think we have a wonderful opportunity to challenge the structures and systems that are really just like completely breaking down because of this pandemic. And I don't think that anyone is necessarily surprised about the cracks in our systems, right, that have been exposed to be huge fault lines due to COVID. And I hope that things change. I'm not necessarily incredibly hopeful. And I think back on other sort of things that I've read about past pandemics and epidemics, or even just thinking about like Ebola and the swine flu and things that I've seen in my lifetime. There's always sort of that fear of infection that feeds our sentiments, it feeds xenophobia, racism, and social exclusion. And then once it's sort of dissipates, we're all fighting for that sense of normalcy again, and so happy to get back to as much as we can as what we see as normal. And sometimes we might see some push for progress in terms of how those systems will change going forward, but then nothing happens or nothing major happens. Like we might lose certain things culturally, like you mentioned the pandemic or the flu of 1918, where after that the common cup fell out of favor. That was a good thing, right? No longer are 8 people sharing from one cup. But they didn't make grand changes to the healthcare system during that time. So, I mean, I don't know. I think there's always going to be some change, but how much is always to be determined.
So I hate to stop it there because that's such an interesting point, and it's so important to talk about how we're going to move forward and not just learn from history, but learn from the present as well, and prepare for what might be coming next. But we will eventually have to bring it out to the audience for Q&A. So I'm going to ask you guys one last question, and this is for everybody. If you could just give me maybe 1 to 2 minutes max so that we stay to time. But how do you think this pandemic will both affect but also inform your science and your work moving forward? Does this change your business from day to day or your mindset? Let's start with Julie.
I can talk actually about this. So coming from a basic science perspective, a lot of us basically have had our entire research program shattered completely. If you work in molecular ecology, if you work on genetics, you cannot go to the lab right now, but also we all donated all of the PPE to hospitals that are near us. A lot of schools have organized to gather all those from a lot of the labs and sent it forward. And those supplies come from our grant money, and we don't have a lot of grant money to begin with. So we have to actually slowly restart the engine for basic research after we are allowed out, and it may not even be possible because we have no money to do it. So we might be stuck for a little while even. And some of those emergency funds are eventually going to have to probably go into funding basic research just to restart people, because we can't do anything about it without basic supplies, as we are all realizing now. Basic supplies turned out to be more important than people have remembered. And I have as a conservation biologist, I actually have been anxious about this every single day, because a lot of our work that is like boots on the ground, you need a person there, cannot happen right now. And sometimes I kind of think about like every day that one of us isn't out there, there is the possibility that someone is killing this, someone is killing that. And nobody is out there to catch them or to prevent that, or to teach other people about conservation and why they shouldn't do it and what are the alternatives that they could be doing. And we're not even allowed to go into the communities right now because it might be unsafe for them if we are coming from highly densely populated places into these remote, isolated places. So all of us have just been completely stopped for now. And anybody who says like you can stay home and write papers clearly is in a privileged class where they are allowed to do that. Everybody I know is functioning at 20% just to make sure they are dressed and fed every single day right now. That's just something that I feel like people have to feel that it's okay for them to be unproductive for a little while. And it's going to come out a lot from basic research. And hopefully from this, people will value the basic research more, because if we understood that and we already had data, we could have probably taken even more preventative measures that would not have led to the high cost of stopping this pandemic from spreading.
Let me add about, I'm an epidemiologist, and it wasn't that long ago when people had no idea what an epidemiologist did. Now pretty much everybody's an epidemiology expert. So it's actually exciting that people understand more about public health and why it's so critical. So that's a great outcome from that. It was about 15 years ago when the US put a lot of money into preparing for pandemic flu, and that's how I became involved in the whole pandemic process. And it kind of came out of a 9/11 response, but it gave us a lot of resources into learning how to plan for a pandemic and make us better prepared, which was good, except that over time, a lot of that funding went away, and that institutional memory of those plans also went away, unless you had somebody like me saying, hey, we wrote this, remember? So what I'm hopeful for is that people after this experience say, hey, we can't let that lapse again. This isn't, hopefully this is a once every 100 years event, or maybe even longer, but the reality is there's going to be a new outbreak of something. It might be smaller, but something in the next 5 to 10 years. And so if we're continuing to plan and prepare for it, we're going to be ahead of the response so we don't end up with a pandemic like this again.
Yeah, as someone in mental health, pandemic awareness is something we're screaming about for long.
Listen to me. Frustrating. So I'm hopeful people will start listening now.
Yeah. Kara, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I think going forward, it's important to see that, and this is the historian's perspective, that we've had American exceptionalism for a long time, except of course for those people that are on the fringes of that exceptionalism. That is being exposed for the lie that it is. I also think that we have a modernist exceptionalism. Oh, we modern people, we can solve this. Oh, we're post-racist, we're post-sexist, we're post anything that we want to be. And we are now realizing that we are just the same human species that we have been for thousands of years. And it is actually a call to arms from my perspective to, instead of the smash and grab of how can I get a bigger piece of the pie, and lean in, so to speak, to use the Sharon Sandberg title quote, I would ask, how can we create a different pie? And how can we examine the systems and policies that we have in place to work for more people rather than just the few white of our society? Males.
There's an all-female panel, so I think we're on board with that.
You know what? I'm so excited that this is an all-female panel because I spent my entire life at all-male panels.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we call them manels in
manels, yeah. But for me, I mean, I work in forensic anthropology with skeletonized remains in archaeology. Like, they can definitely wait. So it's fine. So I'm not going to be affected too much there. But in terms of the SciComm and science communication works that I do, I think it's really important for me to sort of expand my efforts and conversations between the public and scientists. Those interactions are really helpful and very important, and they do make a huge difference to how people feel about scientists and people that work in the sciences because they're like, this scientist is my friend and I trust this person. So I definitely intend to expand those efforts. And also, I have an opportunity to sort of pivot and include more educational content about public health and hygiene, particularly because I work with kids. And so I'm really excited to expand that content and to find ways to support at-home learning for parents and anybody else who is at home and has an opportunity to engage in these conversations with their families.
Yeah, that's an important point. I'm loving all the Tony Fauci love. You know, how frequently do we have someone from the NIH as a rock star who's on the news every day? You know, I've seen so much love for him on the internet, and it's really heartening from a psychom perspective because, you know, that trust is really important for what we do. And so hopefully this will help with that moving forward.
That's of a lot of other nations also where they've had their health ministers be the ones front and center. I think New Zealand has a female one also, so it's like really good for other SciComm reasons.
Great. Julie, your work is obviously really important in the now, but do you think people's reactions to this current crisis going to inform your work moving forward, or at least add more data?
I think, you know, again, I work pretty exclusively with people who either work with or for animals. Like I have a pretty tight niche there. And we already, in, you know, my audiences, my community, we're pretty doubled down on the importance of mental health. And where we kind of go wrong in our society is we define mental health as the absence of mental illness, and that is not what mental health is at all. And what I think comes out of this is a increased desire to really want to cultivate mental health. And mental health is what you need when times are challenging and struggling like we are now. Like we don't need our mental health when our lives are, you know, going great, when everything's dialed in. We need our mental health when all of a sudden we're faced with a pandemic or a relationship ends or we lose our job or we have financial instability. And so this is the time. And what I think is so also important about the work that I do is that I'm constantly teaching people that their emotions do not come from the circumstances. COVID-19 does not create any emotion in any of us. If it did, we would all feel exactly the same, and we don't. We all have a variety of emotions. Some people think it's a hoax, right? So they feel indifferent towards it. So I'm teaching people all of the time that it's never the circumstance that creates your emotion. It's what you think about the circumstance. And that's the only thing we ever can control. What we think, which determines how we feel, which determines how we behave. So, you know, this just enhances the work that I do, but gives us more examples. And to be honest, I keep telling my community, COVID-19 is a classroom for us for mental health and personal development. Like we can grow from this, or we can shrink from this. Like we have a choice here. And, you know, I encourage my community to like, come on, like, let's put our fist in the air and let's do this. We are not a victim. We are not a victim to the life's circumstances out there. Now, again, that becomes different. If you're infected, you do become a victim for a short period of time. But, you know, there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of anxiety about this. And, you know, I love helping people through that, because that you can feel very powerless if you believe that this pandemic is creating those emotions for you. So that's where I'm at with all of this.
Thank you so much, Julie. Hopefully we really can take this and learn from it, because like you said, it's a classroom.
Yeah.
You know, so hopefully as a scientific community and public health, we can, you know, take what we can learn from this and move forward.
Mm-hmm.
So we are going to shift to an audience Q&A, but first we have some more random acts of kindness to share with you guys, but then we're going to come back to the panel with audience Q&As. Can we make that full screen? All right. So we actually have a couple submissions from the audience, which is great. Let's bring them up. So first, this is from Ariel in Houston. She said, my sister made some amazing gumbo when I brought her groceries. They did a distance trade-off. Since I'm still working, I've been trying to pass it on by only purchasing from small businesses and digitally tipping bartenders, servers, and performers. Support local. Thanks, Ariel. We have another. There's no name associated with this one, but it says, my parents are elderly and my sister is currently undergoing chemotherapy. As the most at-risk groups, they really need to stay home all the time. A friend who lives in a completely different part of the city and doesn't have a car offered to shop for them, even if it meant a 3-hour round trip for him. I love that. That's so sweet. I love these stories of people coming together despite all of the difficulties that we're facing. I think we had at least one more. Yes. Oh, so this is from Dawn on Facebook. She said, I just broke my foot and my Buy Nothing group provided a knee scooter to her for free. That's really sweet. And that's particularly important now because accessing health services that are non-COVID related can be a lot more difficult during a pandemic. So thank you to her Buy Free group for doing that. Okay, I think we had a few more if we can advance the slide. Neighbors helping neighbors. So Greater Good magazine submitted a story about how in the UK, a woman designed a postcard that you can drop off with neighbors who are self-isolating, offering your help with shopping or a friendly phone call. That is a great idea. Actually, I might start doing that in my neighborhood. We have a neighborhood social media group. So I might start doing that. That's a great idea. And teddy bears in New Zealand. Apparently, New Zealanders are placing teddy bears in their windows during the coronavirus lockdowns to brighten the mood and give children a game to play by spotting the bears in their neighborhoods, hopefully from a safe distance or from a car. That's really, really sweet. That photo came from ABC News. And memes. Who doesn't love all the quarantine content? I love how creative people get when they're sitting home and bored and have way too much time to spend on the internet and Photoshop. And a lot of the jokes centered around, when you find out your daily lifestyle is actually called quarantine. People just being antisocial and now having an excuse for it. Okay. And I think that might be the end. Let me look real quick to see if we have any more acts of kindness coming in from the audience. Here we go. This is from Anastasia. Anastasia says she's not a tailor, but she started to make face masks from 100% cotton fabric. They're very well received here since in the part of Florida where she lives, they seem to be really hard to find and people are selling them, but she's giving them away for free. Thank you so much for doing that for your community, Anastasia. I don't know if you guys have heard, hopefully you have, otherwise I don't know what our news services are doing, but there's a new CDC recommendation telling people to wear some sort of face covering every time they go out in public. The idea is not to protect you from the virus, but in case you're asymptomatic, to prevent you from spreading it to everyone around you. But there's the added complication where we have trouble getting PPE to healthcare providers as it is, so we didn't want to rush on surgical masks. So people have been making them at home. It's actually pretty easy. I'll see if we can share something on our social media from the Surgeon General showing you how to make one out of an old handkerchief or a t-shirt. But this kind of work that Anastasia and it sounds like some of her friends are doing is really important to help our community prevent the spread and really flatten that curve. So thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on to the audience Q&A with our panelists. So let's get our first one. So this question is from Emily. She says, I'm really interested in hearing how the burnout will happen and how we can try to guard against it. The people that are out and at the stores and then taking care of business, their personality drives them to take charge. So now is the first time we have people doing that. How do we avoid that kind of burnout with our quarantining procedures?
Yeah, I can speak to that just because compassion fatigue, burnout can contribute to compassion fatigue. So with burnout, I mean, what burnout really is when we are being asked to, or we're doing too much with too little. Like there's an imbalance there. So we are doing too much without enough resources. That could be time, money, energy. And the way to prevent that would be really upping our self-care. And never before have we really needed to understand not only what self-care is. There are many misconceptions. It's not manicures and pedicures, and it's not really bubble baths either, nor is it a glass of wine or two, which I know makes me lots of enemies. But really is giving ourselves our own time and attention, and in little small ways, just in 10 minutes here or 10 minutes there, where my intention and my practices are about self-rejuvenation. And we're hardwired to want to help others, especially women. We happen to have this amazing female board here, panel. And so women, we're hardwired for that, but we're also hardwired to neglect ourselves. And this is not a time to neglect ourselves. This is a time to really ramp it up in our self-care. And maybe perhaps for the first time ever, to figure out what that is for us, because it's very individual.
Yeah, I have a lot of friends who are saying they're going to come out of this better than they've been in their whole life because they're walking the fine line of self-care between watching 8 hours of Netflix and then exercising for 4 hours. Does anyone else have anything to add to that? How do we avoid that burnout?
I don't think you avoid it. I think you go through it. I think it's a fire that everybody goes through on their own time, and that some populations go through earlier than others. And I think that what will be interesting to see is if in some local systems, as there's a flare-up of the disease in one place and a flare-up in another place, can people pick it up and help? What did Mr. Rogers say? Look for the helpers. So, I think that everyone will go through this fire. And I think there's a lot of people who think, oh, I'm young, I'm not going to get sick. Oh, I'm not over there, I'm not going to get sick. And I think this one, someone very close to me has already gotten sick, and not only sick once, but twice. Felt better, and then it came back. And so this is this coronavirus, I think, needs a little bit of a booster, comes back and gets you again, it seems, because we don't have any immunity to it. And so I think the amount of burnout in our population could be more than any of us would like. It's going to be an interesting time.
One of the things I've seen working in disaster management the last 15 years, a lot of us are driven to respond. That adrenaline rush is exciting, and certainly as a public health person, there's a certain level of excitement to jump in, and we can't not do it. We're driven to do this, and we don't see the burnout. And I've seen this happen a lot in different settings, or shelter settings in response to hurricanes and whatnot. We don't know when to stop, and sometimes somebody else has to tell you, hey, stop. Go take a day off. We don't need you to be here 24/7 because you're not actually helping anybody else at this point. You're wearing yourself out. But it can be really hard because most of us that work in this field, it's our vocation, it's our passion, and it's hard to let go of it. I've been doing it long enough now that I'm just learning, and I have a husband that reminds me to let go. But it can be really hard, and so I think paying attention to others and watching for signs of burnout and telling them, you need to take a step back for everybody's sake as well as your own, because you're going to wear yourself out. It's important.
So we have another question from Josh in the Q&A. I think Cherise and Myesha, this might be best directed at you. It says, given our situation, how do you go about giving people helpful answers based on available data when they seek simple, finite answers, black and white? So, I mean, this is an important point in all of science communication. What we know is based on what we know now, but the whole thing is a moving target. It's an evolving process. So how do you go about doing that? And also, I would like to add, perhaps as a consumer of information, how should we be framing what we're receiving to make it as useful to us as possible?
Be careful of the argument, right? I think that sometimes it can be really frustrating because we have information and we're like, you need to listen. Why aren't you listening? But people aren't always listening with their reason or statistical data and that sort of thing. Sometimes they're bringing up like, well, my friend told me, right? We make these conversations very personal often. And so if you have, on the one hand, somebody is arguing maybe an anecdotal situation, right? And on the other hand, you're trying to share your facts and your figures and be very methodical and statistical about that. I don't think that's like helpful unless that's your audience. So first of all, know your audience, right? If you're having these conversations with friends or in groups or even like discussion groups, I think that there are ways that you can bring up your stats that are very abstract, right? So it sort of helps if you can contextualize that information in an anecdotal story. Perhaps you might need to provide some explanation to begin with. And by that, I mean, you might need to explain, well, this is why we think this, or this is how this system has developed. You might have to couch your explanation, and yes, it takes more time, and in the end, they may not believe you, but the goal sometimes is not necessarily to get somebody to just believe you flat out. It's to help them to critically think about what it is that they're saying. So the Socratic Method can be really helpful, asking them questions. Well, why do you think this? And where did this come from? And how about if you apply this to this idea to this situation? Do you see how it doesn't work? And sometimes it's the long way around to the answer. But if your goal is to help your friend or your family member or whoever it is, have information that is grounded in some sort of scientific reality, then go the long way around to that answer.
Right. That basically ditto everything. Working in the vaccine community, we went this a lot with anti-vaxxers, and the same anti-vaxxers are different, but the resident parent, you guys start. What is your actual concern? What's the question you have? And let me address that question rather than throwing statistics at you, which aren't going to mean anything because that's not what your concern is. And with COVID, it's the same thing. Understanding what their question is, what's the fear, what's the worry, and then trying to adapt your response. There's some people that love the data, and I'll throw data at you. But often what I do in my writing is to translate the data into normal people speak. And sometimes it's at a high level, sometimes it's at a lower level. It really depends on the audience. So what Myesha said is, know your audience, understand the question they're asking. And, back to the story about Ebola and burials, understand the community dynamics before you try to implement any kind of change in behavior.
Yeah, I've actually done a lot of work on strategic communications for vaccine hesitancy specifically.
We need to talk more.
Yeah. And I mean, that's exactly it. You have to understand where people are coming from and what their real fear is. But sort of to that point, a lot of the issues that I found as well have been risk communication. We're not great at really conceptualizing what some of these numbers we're throwing out as far as risk. And it's true for vaccine hesitancy. But I think it also is true for coronavirus as well. What is your actual risk numerically for getting sick? And so do you have any thoughts on how we can help people really internalize that? Because I think it was Kara saying, young people are like, oh, well, I'm not going to get sick. It's like, well, hopefully, but also don't you have parents and grandparents who might?
Well, and there's two sides to it. I think at the beginning there was a lot of fear and a lot of worst case scenarios. Everybody's freaking out. I did a lot of, let's put it in perspective. Okay, yes, we're seeing more 20 to 40-year-olds getting sick, but we're also that's more of the population. So as a percentage of the population, we're not seeing anything different. So it's okay, stay calm. On the other side, you have the 20 to 40-year-olds that are saying, well, it's not going to happen to me. And so I have to come back, well, no, it actually can. And we do have deaths in that population. It's just at a population level. As an epidemiologist, I'm looking at everybody and how likely it is. And so you're making a gamble. And if you're 20 years old, you know that you might have a 1% chance of dying versus if you're 80 years old and you have a 15% chance of dying. But is it really worth that 1%? And not just to die, but give it to everybody else around you.
I'll add that I think there's a lot of cognitive dissonance going on where if somebody gives you the actual facts, you have it set in your mind what the situation should be and you cannot and do not believe it. And I think brings me back to this idea of a cultural memory of pain. I was thinking about that since I said it. I'm like, but too much pain causes a society to break apart and be quite cruel to other people and to build walls, and too much can cause people to react in a difficult way. And too little, we become lazy and just think that the conveniences of the fast world will go on forever. So it needs to be somehow this happy medium where we all realize we can be affected. And there's nothing like a virus. Do you guys remember in Jurassic Park, the first one, where the scientist goes, the Tyrannosaurus Rex is eating the kids like that, Metasaurus, and he's like, he's just doing what he does. This virus is just doing what it does. And we human beings, we are just animals on this planet. We are just here on this planet, and that virus is doing what it does to us. And so all of this is just, we are all, I think, realizing, whether we want to or not, realizing how unspecial we are. We are, whether you have black or brown skin, whether you're male or female, whether you're gay or straight, whether you're an immigrant or not, that this virus can get Trump the way it can get me, it can get the man the way it can get a woman, but there are some other things. So it allows us to fake it, though. So the men think, oh, I'm more in danger than the woman, and the young can think, I'm in less danger than the old. And so it allows us to cheat and create, it's still all about, with this human species of self-interest and a kind of narcissism, what about me? And am I going to be hurt? Is my family going to be hurt? Can I build a wall? And the more we go through this, if we are not irreparably harmed, which again, I will say, I do not think we will be, I think that this could help us to tear down more walls that have been built in the last couple of years.
Do you think that narcissism might actually lend to altruism, because helping another in this particular case helped you?
If that narcissism is down, potentially, like say to a child, you have to give them consequences, right? What's the consequence for your action? There need to be some consequences here for the whole human race. The best thing I saw about this COVID-19 is that Mother Earth has sent everyone to their room to think about what they've done. And we all get to go home and think about what we've done. How much have we consumed? How much have I flown in the past year? How much have I needed convenience? How much have I gentrified this neighborhood or that neighborhood? How much have I connected or not? And so I think we all of us, and if there's an idea that we're post-racist or post-sexist, I think that we all need to be responsible for everything and think that none of us anywhere are post anything. And we are all responsible for it all. And we are all of us holding Mother Earth in our hands.
So can I make a quick comment about the Mother Earth thing? I think that a lot of people have been saying that also, but I want to kind of temper people in crossing over into ecofascism. And
yeah. See, this is not my world, please.
So I have been hearing a lot of eco-fascist stuff from various people, and it's somewhat alarming to me because it really has a very particular worldview, right? And it's a worldview that's for a very particular percentage of the world that is privileged. And in some cases, you cannot actually do those things because you don't have alternative livelihoods, you don't have those other options. And when you're being an eco-fascist, you're just trying to say, well, it's a new form of imperialism, but we just don't want to call it that.
Yeah. No, that's an important point. Not everyone has the option of
to work. Yeah.
So I actually, sort of on that point, I've seen a bunch of questions about, I'm going to lump them all into one because they're all, I think, different facets of the same conversation. So with urban expansion, with urbanization, with population growth, with habitat destruction, how do all of these things come together to make us more susceptible to these public health emergencies? And I suppose a good question is, are we more susceptible now to public health emergencies because of them? And what should we do how should we integrate these questions into our future planning?
So I think a lot of people have started thinking about more strategically about how we have green spaces in cities when they plan them. And some of those green spaces are actually really necessary to ensure that the separated green spaces are connected, or there's some middle ground for a bird to stop before it goes to the next spot, right? So at the very least, that can create a pseudo-contiguous landscape compared to just completely nothing, complete concrete. There's nothing that any animal can survive on. And when people start at least thinking creatively about how they can actually create these green spaces, you see a lot of really different answers. And those have only really started coming out in the past, 5-10 years, when people are starting to make the sides of walls are completely grass or moss or whatever. And there are rooftops that are completely green, and there's actually bats and birds that use them. And that helps the city continue having these natural services that the animals provide. So like pest control. So you have birds and you have bats that are free pest control instead of spraying pesticides that are going to be something that the mosquitoes are resistant to in 5 years. So the bats are still able to echolocate and chase them, and the birds are also, and you have this more controlled insect population. And people don't seem to realize that there are animals that are contributing to things like that, but they're afraid of like, oh, this animal's going to poop on me and then I'm going to get some virus because it's going to land in my mouth or something. It's really unlikely to happen. And at the same time also, people like overreact about those types of like 1 in a gazillion chances. And so they overreact by saying we should just get rid of all the animals. And that doesn't help. When you have these cases where you have people responding by culling, you're getting rid of adults who are probably resistant or have tolerance, or they're, for whatever reason, they are healthy. And then you have juveniles that are not being targeted, that might be naive. They don't have behaviors that might result in less transmission between the same species. And you end up creating more of the same problem also, because you have now animals that are like, oh, there's no bat here, so I'm going to fly from this crowded space I'm into this empty space, and this other population was still infected in the way that they were trying to cull. So you're getting more transmission between those types of places. I think what people have to remember is that the places that we're in used to have natural environments also. So when you go out and you try to garden, you want to look at native plants and prefer to plant native plants in your spaces, and not just like, ornamental flowers that are often from the trade in Asia that get transported here. And I think that at the same time, people need to be very conscious of that, because there are certain folks who are collectors of plants, and they have stolen plants from botanical gardens, like rare plants from botanical gardens for their private collections. And so there is like crime also that is resulting from this. There's a lot of that goes under the rug because our laws for protecting the environment and wildlife have really low penalties. So the cost of business a lot of times for people to say, I can go to jail for 3 months, I can pay $1,000, and I'm going to sell this ivory, which is worth the same as its weight in cocaine in Malaysia, which is like, there's a death penalty. So I'm going to risk that because that will be something that people will look at. And that's not just to say about the medicinal use of things in traditional Chinese medicine. That is a really big problem, but also a lot of folks forget that in the West, especially in Europe and the US, we buy a lot of exotic pets, and those often are not as legal as you think they are based on their paperwork. They are coming from places where they are extracting them from the wild and not captive breeding them. And they are extracting them in ways that they know they have 90% death rates. And so you're getting only 10% of that, and they collect extra to make sure they still have something to sell. So you need to stop some of this immediately in the places that they're happening. And so you want to protect and promote places that something is native to. And sometimes those native spaces are in cities now. And so you need to make space for those organisms to also coexist with you.
Yeah, and I love that idea. It's kind of tied to something that we've been talking about a lot in the malaria community now, where you have to have really, I guess, integrative type thinking, where you're working with civil engineers, you're working with builders and construction companies to really build in these good practices into a community from the beginning with the physical infrastructure, but also working across fields to try and think, okay, how do we make this green space work for people? How do we make it work for the environment? And how do we make it work for the animals around us? To really make sure that we have an entirely healthy environment and not just healthy for us, because long-term, they're so connected, healthy for us, but unhealthy for the environment or the animals around us or the habitats that they live in. It's just not sustainable. I mean, and I don't mean that in the green sense, even though that's true too. I mean that literally that health for us is going to wane over time if we don't really think about this. So thanks, that was great. Does anyone else have any thoughts on that? Cherise, you're an epidemiologist. Are we more at risk now that our populations are growing and urbanization is increasing around the world?
Absolutely. There's certainly, that's the theory of why we're seeing more of these diseases, because we're coming into contact with animals in a way that we didn't normally do before. And I don't mean in the markets where they're being sold. I mean, just we're entering their habitat more and more and destroying their habitat. And so we're going to become more, we're going to be exposed more, which increases the likelihood that we infect with someone. This doesn't need to necessarily change. It could have always been capable of infecting us. It just never did because we never saw it. And then it gets introduced into the human population because of close contact with a particular animal. So certainly it's a possibility. And I would not be surprised to see more outbreaks, you know, maybe small outbreaks, not like this, but something's going to happen every 5 to 10 years without a doubt.
So one thing that is a common factor in causing problems in nature is logging, because you actually get roads, then they go deeper into the forest, and that actually introduces people to then access previously untouched habitat where the animals have safe roosts, and now they're unsafe. And roads also cause separation in ways that if fragments, you know, a road is a very big barrier for a tiny frog, but not for us, but it is a problem. And I don't think people realize this, but rhinos don't like to cross roads. So when you have a rhino population that's already very limited in a national park, and you have it on the on this entire landscape in the south, but you build a road to cut through it, now they're separated from east and west, and they will not come together to breed. And so you're not going to get new rhinos, which is what your money is for. So there are these like really basic things that are happening that we cannot encourage, but because of logging, they happen.
So we're actually running short on time. So before we run out of time to do this, would you guys mind, all 5 of you, and maybe in 30 seconds, 20 seconds, let's keep it short so that everyone has a chance to talk. If you have one thing you want our audience members to take home with them from this discussion about the current situation, what would it be? So let's start with Julie.
I would say, because there's this huge level of uncertainty, right, that we're all experiencing, because we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, next week, next month, 3 months from now. I guess what I would impart is, as humans, like, we're not, like, this isn't our first rodeo as it relates to uncertainty. We've all been uncertain before, and we only need to look into our own lives to say, when have I been uncertain before, and I'm still here. And that's what I ask us to look at that and notice where our strength is and our perseverance.
Thanks. Susan.
Healthy bats equals healthy ecosystems equals fewer pandemic issues, and also fund basic research, especially natural history museums. They give you data that you need for your pandemic work. I still have 15 seconds. Also, just when we can give hugs, please give a hug to your local hospital staff, because they've been working very hard.
Thank you, Susan. Kara?
The less human beings think they're exceptional on this planet, the better. And the more connected they are with this entire earth, the better. I heard a podcast recently of a guy who was going through malaria in the 60s because he wanted to be a Buddhist monk. So he's in there meditating, but he also got this malarial fever. And his guru came in and he said, "You've got this. So many people have been through this before. So many people have been sick like this before. You're not special. You're just part of this earth like anybody else. So go ahead and get through it." And I like the idea of cyclical return.
I love that. As a malaria specialist, please go get treated when you have a fever for malaria. But I love the sentiment. Thank you. Myesha.
Sure. Beware of misinformation. Take some the world, get their point of view, put it all together, and read Carl Sagan's book, Demon Haunted World.
Yes.
Yep.
That's a great one. And there are, at that point, so many webinars going on from like around the world, including the WHO has a whole bunch. So there's a lot of really good information there from a lot of different sources that is available virtually in a way I don't think was quite there before. So take advantage of that. And we'll wrap up with you, Cherise. What's your one takeaway for our audience?
So I'm going to reiterate what Myesha said, is that be careful what you share on social media. Go through your sources, make sure that source is something that the other scientists have documented, because you could be sharing potentially harmful information, and that's critical. The other thing is reach out to your friends and neighbors, especially those who might be in difficult circumstances. You may not be able to reach out to them physically, but give them a call if you can to find out if they need something, or somebody that might be in a domestic violence situation, or an LGBT youth that might be in an uncomfortable home situation. Find out if there's a way that you can assist them in any way. And then finally, don't forget about this in 5 years and say that we don't need to fund pandemic planning. We need to fund disease surveillance continually. And in public health, if you hear that nothing is happening, it's because we're all working so hard to prevent anything bad from happening. So it's good when it seems like it's boring and nothing's going on, but that's why it's so important to continue to fund it. So don't forget about it in 5 or 10 years when your leadership is asking you if they should put resources into it.
Yeah, if the public health community is urgently asking for action and then not that many people get sick, it might be because it worked. The response worked before people died.
In public health, if we do everything right, nobody hears about it. And if we do everything wrong, everybody hears about it. So be glad when you don't hear about it.
Exactly. All right. Well, I think that's the end of our panel. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been such a fascinating conversation. And I'm sorry to anyone whose questions we couldn't get to. We had literally 100, so there just wasn't enough time. But thank you so much for joining us. And we hope you enjoyed it today. We would love to bring you more, but unfortunately, this festival is the main source of income that we usually have to host more events. And we've lost that this year for obvious reasons. We want to be responsible members of our community. But if you could spare anything at all, we would be so grateful if you could go to tasteofscience.org and hit that donate button on our homepage. That way we can bring you more content, both in the near future and for next year's festival. We're going to post this to our YouTube channel along with the links being sent to all of our guests. So feel free to rewatch it if you really enjoyed it, share it amongst your friends. And we'll give you information on how you can continue to follow all of our amazing panelists, both through social media and their various blogs moving forward. So thank you so much for joining us, guys. We're going to sign off. But again, visit tasteofscience.org if you want to follow on.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.